There's a lot of fear and uncertainty. For you to understand, every news break that happens here in the United States is a news break in Ukraine. They've just been so intertwined as far as the countries now. But Ukrainians, I think, they've been through hell and back over the last 3 years. So for them, they basically have that attitude, we will deal with that once it gets to us. But there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of fear because the funding that U.S. been sending there, I'm talking about humanitarian funding, I'm not talking about military aid, is basically a bread and butter.
Welcome to the Dov Baron Show. Come for the stories, stay for the learning. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I'm curious, do you think the U.S. should stop supporting Ukraine? Or is the U.S. abandoning Ukraine in its darkest hour? On February 24th, 2022, Vladimir Putin's army invaded Ukraine in a war that he believed Russia would win within 3 weeks. However, the Ukraine people stood up and fought back in a way I think very few people expected. Some of that was possible, of course, because of the support of NATO nations, especially the United States. But is America abandoning Ukraine in its darkest hour when they need it the most? As the Trump administration attempts to freeze all federal loans and grants, that has impacted all kinds of things, and the ripples are being felt far and wide. Nonprofits, especially those like Hope for Ukraine, Inc., which is led by Yuriy Boyechko, face daunting challenges. With the US slashing its $13.9 billion humanitarian budget, the largest in the world, what will happen to the people and the geopolitics of the region after teetering on the brink? This is the Dov Baron Show, where curiosity meets profound insights. Tap into our community of deeply curious learners by hitting that subscribe button right now. This is not just another podcast, it's your passport to unparalleled insights. Every episode features the wisdom of global leaders, scientists, entertainers, philosophers, theologians, and journalists. For the next 2 episodes, we're joined by Yuriy Boyechko. He's the founder and president of Hope for Ukraine, Inc. Yuriy is a graduate of Regent University with an MA in Media Communication and has dedicated his life to the media and entertainment industry before turning his focus to humanitarian efforts in 2016. Ladies and gentlemen, turn up the volume and help me welcome Yuriy Boyechko, who through his nonprofit has been the lifeline for the most vulnerable people in Ukraine, providing medical care, food, and clothing, especially for children affected by HIV and AIDS. Welcome, Yuriy.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
It's a pleasure, my friend. I'm really glad you're here. This is, to say the least, interesting times is one way of putting it. You and I were talking about, before you came on, about the emotional source code of Putin that you read. And I always like to find out the emotional source code of my guest, because nobody starts out where they are. There's a run-up to that. And obviously, the last part of that run-up is you being a graduate in media and all the rest of it. But you are an American, but you were born in the Ukraine. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes. I was in Ukraine until I was 16 years old, and then I came here. I did my studying here, and then I'm an American citizen. Yes.
Well, for now.
Yes.
For now. I mean, who knows?
You never know. Yes.
Sorry, a little dark humor there, but it was called for, I think. Talk to us about this transition, because you got involved in humanitarian aid in 2016. Most people are aware of what happened in 2022. They don't know what happened earlier, particularly people who are not right there on top of the news. Tell us why you transitioned over.
So first of all, I was always involved in some sort of humanitarian work in Ukraine, even while in media world, but I felt like there was something missing, that was not exactly where I was supposed to be. And after annexation of Crimea and Donbass region that took place in 2014, then we saw that first wave of refugees, we saw the first wave of struggle that people faced in Ukraine, and that's how we started Hope for Ukraine. So we started working there, providing shelter to them, providing medical assistance, providing a place for them to restart their life. But the whole war in Ukraine started way before 2022. It started in 2014. It just has not been really publicized. And for me right now, as transitioning from for-profit to non-profit world is the most exciting time for me as far as satisfaction. I'm not talking about financial part of things, but as far as satisfaction, going to bed every night knowing that you have accomplished something that money cannot buy, it's worth all the money in the world. That's why I'm happy that 2016 happened and Hope for Ukraine started, and now we are able to really be one of the largest on the boots on the ground organizations in Ukraine, really helping those who need the most.
But it's interesting, like you said, it's giving him more satisfaction than money can buy. But money is the issue. This is what we're talking about here, is Ukraine has received a lot of money from the United States, and there's arguments on both sides of that, and we're certainly going to get to that. But you and people like you who are doing great humanitarian work can't operate without money. Now we get to this place, which I think a lot of Americans have become to, which is, well, we got to look after our own, and we're not doing so well, which is not really true, but we're not doing so well, so we got to pull in our own coffers, and we can't keep spending all this money. I think that from my point of view, and I want to hear from you, from my point of view, I think war is, fucking stupid, and it's never made any sense. It never will make any sense. And my greatest challenge with it is that the people who suffer in war are not the people who create the wars. Of course, it's the soldiers on both sides, but it's the people on the ground who are innocent people who are going through all these things. From your point of view, what do you think the American person who is maybe not far towards, oh yeah, let's give them the money, or far towards, let's not give them money, but the person in the middle who's kind of struggling with this, what do you think they don't understand yet?
I think that they don't understand the importance of Ukraine regarding toward entire world order as we know right now, right? So if US is trying to be a leader of the world, and if US wants to still have influence on the European continent, Ukraine plays a very important part to foreign policy of the United States. Because Ukraine right now has a largest army in Europe. And what's the second largest army in Europe right now?
The one that's attacking them.
I mean, it's Russia.
Outside of them, would that be Germany or the UK?
France.
France. Really? Okay.
So France has about 250,000 strong army. United Kingdom has an army as big as you can fit on Wembley Stadium.
Okay.
And Russia has, I think now 1.5 million strong, right? So United States have a base in Ramstein, Germany, big base with a lot of service people there. So if, God forbid, Ukraine falls, and Russia will definitely be interested moving on to Poland, Czech Republic, and reestablishing influence the way they had it before the fall of Soviet Union. So then US would have to step in with our army to stop these advancements. That's why what Ukraine is doing right now is actually preventing from that happening. Our soldiers, our people dying every day to make sure Americans don't have to have boots on the ground in Europe, preventing Russia moving past Ukraine. And somebody asked me, like, are you sure Russia wants to move past Ukraine? Absolutely they do, because Putin is dictator. And they always announce what they want to do before they do it. And if you look at his agreement and the articles he sent to NATO in 2021, one of his key issues was he asked NATO to pull back to 1997 before all the Eastern Bloc countries joined the NATO. I'm talking about Poland, Czech Republic, Romania, Estonia, Latvia, all these countries. He said, hey.
Well, that's the Minsk agreement, right?
No, that's Minsk agreement that was between Russia and West and Ukraine. It's after 2014. But NATO, so there was original NATO countries that was up to Germany. And then in 1997, all Poland, all other Eastern Bloc countries that used to be under influence of Russia has joined the NATO.
Yes.
And the NATO expanded. And now NATO expanded again. Finland has joined NATO. And Sweden. But before the full-scale war in Ukraine, one of the points that Putin put in front of NATO, listen, if you don't want this war to happen, you have to pull back all the way to Germany, basically. So you have to remove all the missile defense and everything from Poland, and I'm going to assess my influence there. So that's basically Ukraine right now is key to holding off Russian army to extending to NATO countries in Europe, which will prevent from US have to send a military there and actually get engaged in active warfare. So that's why Ukraine is very important to national security and foreign policy of US as a whole.
Yeah, and as you and I talked about before in our previous conversation, of course, there is the argument this is a proxy war between America and Russia. And the truth is that NATO did break the Minsk agreement about how far they were supposed to go and that not another country could be part of that. And I'm in no way defending Putin, because you and I have had this discussion before. But if I have a paranoid leader in a country and I'm the paranoid leader starting to see myself getting surrounded by other military forces, it's easy to poke that paranoid bear. And so there's that side of it. Now, you've been on the ground, you've been in that world, you're from there. What's your pushback against that? I'm open to that entirely.
So you got to understand that when you're talking about Putin, you're talking about a person that's not all there up in the head. And the reason why is this is the person who wants to rewrite the history.
Mm-hmm.
His number one regret in life is that Soviet Union fell apart.
Absolutely.
And he keep repeating that. So he feels like he is being anointed by some sort of power from above. And I think he definitely feels like he's sent by God or by some special forces to rebuild Soviet Union. And that's what he's working toward. He wants to bring everything back before 1991. So Belarus is basically part of Russia. Then you look at country of Georgia. So what they did, they went in, they annexed a little bit of territory, bam, 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 they controlled that. Now they installed completely pro-Russian president. Ukraine, until Poroshenko, the president before Zelensky, was completely controlled by Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And if Yanukovych was still a president there would be no war because there was no need for Putin to attack because he completely had control over politics, over media, over everything. But as soon as Ukrainian people stood up, said, hey, we want to live in democratic society. We want to be part of EU. We want to be together with our Western brothers and sisters. That's when the problem started. So for him, it's all about bringing back Soviet Union. And the way he's trying to rebuild this one country at a time. But you cannot do that. The whole thing is that if everybody is going to go around the world and they try to recreate the history, right? The world is going to be complete chaos. And that's why, like right now, we're living in very critical time. It's basically the whole world order getting reshaped. It's either the West will still be the West or it's going to be something else, or we're going to fall into autocrat regimes, pray to them like China, like Russia, where they will dictate the world how things should be done. That's why he's definitely a person that's not have a really sound mind. And I believe he's definitely feels like unless he accomplished that mission on Earth, recreating the USSR, his whole life means nothing because the guy doesn't need no money. He has this idea, and that's why for him, killing 1 million people is not a big deal. He's going to kill 10 million of people.
Let's go to that. Obviously, what you talked about him regaining the Soviet Union, as you know, I covered all of that in the Putin report. And by the way, if you're listening to this and you want to get the Putin report, it is available at dovbaron.com. There's a special report on there where I analyze the emotional source code of Putin, speaking about how he believes he is a special envoy and how he is the messiah of Russia. And he even wrote and says, without Russia, the world's not worth having. So he is willing to destroy the planet. There's no argument on any of that. The interesting thing for me is that as much as he's trying to regain the old Soviet Union, America is also playing its game around its colonizations of the selling the American dream to everybody else. Now, at the same time, you and I today sitting here in 2025 having this discussion, Ukraine could crumble under the pressure of no finances. And that could be, as you said, have a snowball effect enormously. And we're seeing things like the autocratic leaders you just talked about with places like Hungary and Turkey. And we're seeing more and more of that. And we're seeing it as extreme right and extreme left. For instance, in Brazil, we had Bolsonaro, who was the tropical Trump, very right. And now you've got, what's his name, Lula, who's extreme left.
Yes.
This extreme pull, the world is being changed dramatically. So the argument might be, I'm not saying it's the right argument, might be, listen, this shit's going on. There's nothing we can do about it. Throw your hands up. You got to take care of your own because America's got tariffs going on now. We're trying to build our finances back. We've traded everything away, all this mentality that Trump is putting forward. And so a lot of people are putting their hands up and going, well, we just got to take care of ourselves because whether we support Ukraine, humanitarian, financially, whatever it might be, the whole thing is going to shit anyway.
Yeah. Then you basically don't consider yourself as a superpower. If you take the inward-looking policies and you say, hey, we'll just close in here, we're going to be rich and happy, and stuff like that. We don't care if the rest of the world is going to go and burn. Listen, every place where influence of America dissolves, there's someone there who's waiting to regain the influence. And if you look the way China's playing the game, so they got Russia in their pocket, they got Hungary in their pocket, they got Serbia in their pocket. They got now Slovakia in their pocket.
Really? I didn't know about Slovakia.
Slovakia is a big ally now. They got the new prime minister that's completely aligned with Russia now. But what I'm saying is that, okay, let's say US pulls out of Ukraine, they stop supporting, then we cannot fight on our own.
No.
We would have to ask for help from someone. So Ukraine is going to become a sphere of influence of China. Because technically, there's only two countries now running the world.
Yes.
There's China and there's US.
Yes.
Russia is not the player that they used to be anymore because they completely destroyed the economy because of this war. So they completely dependent on China. If China pulls out the plug, the Russian economy will collapse in a matter of 3 months.
So that's really interesting. Obviously, you're paying attention to this. Do you see that as a possibility? Do you see the possibility that China are going to go, and just throw up their hands and go, let's leave Russia to self-implode?
If US puts pressure on China, because China still depends on US a lot. Their economy is not doing well. They still depend on American banks and American business to do business there. They cannot afford economic downfall in China because there's going to be big riots and it's a lot of people that live in there. So US, if they would apply enough pressure on China and China would abandon Russia, in the end of the day, be honest, Russian economy is just the oil and gas. That's all they got going on. It's the size of Italy as far as GDP. It's not a big economy. They flex in their muscle because they have nuclear bombs. If they would not have nuclear bombs, nobody would even look at them twice. But every time Putin is back behind the wall, he's trying to flex the nuclear card. And that's the reason why they still a side to that everybody's afraid of. So what I'm saying is that if US wants to still be a dominant power on all of the continents, I'm talking about Europe, Asia, and Africa, then we have to maintain foreign policy that's outward looking, not inward looking. Because you're always going to have problems. Everybody's going to have bills to pay. There's always going to be a lack of something. But it's up to US to decide where you want to be as a country next 10, 15 years from now, because China is not stopping. You look at the African continent, every country there
owes China billions
that
have been invested in their infrastructure. China are doing exactly what America did in the 80s. In the 70s and 80s, they went in, made these huge loans to build infrastructure, took the mineral rights of that country, and put everybody in debt, and therefore had all the leverage and all the power. They did it in South America, they did it in Africa, and now China's just walking right in and doing exactly the same. I think you're absolutely right that the real threat is China. The only difference is the nuclear threat that is Russia and the instability of the psychology of the person who has a finger on that button. Maybe both of those leaders might be a bit iffy around who's got a finger on the button
Yeah.
because they're driven by their egos and their desire to be all powerful.
But in my opinion, if US abandons Ukraine, the only path of security for us as a country, for us to exist as a country, is to get our own nuclear bomb. If you look, for example, at the conflict between Pakistan and India, they all been fighting with each other, and then everybody got nuclear bomb, and everybody is relaxed now because nobody wants to.
Mutual destruction.
Yeah. And that's the only way, because in the end of the day, Ukraine as a country right now, we still have 30 million people living there. They have nowhere to go. Europe cannot take so many people. They're already struggling as it is. So what these 30 million people going to do? They're never going to submit to Russia. If you look at the history of Ukrainian people, the fighting between us and Russians going way back, centuries. We were occupied and we fought back and stuff like that. So Ukrainians are not the type of folks who's going to sit down and drink latte and eat croissants. So I think US has to remain as a strong country. That's why I think they need to keep on having outward-looking policies, in my opinion.
So you've had your organization, and you've been supporting, and you've been doing amazing work all these years while this craziness has been going on, well, before that even. So what is the feeling, sort of boots on the ground, of people in the Ukraine? This is a very real threat. Probably, in many ways, it's the lifeline of hope, is this humanitarian aid. And the thought that that could go away, how are Ukrainian people, how are they confronting that? How are they dealing with that?
There's a lot of fear and uncertainty. For you to understand, every news break that happens here in the United States is a news break in Ukraine. They've just been so intertwined as far as the countries now. But Ukrainians, I think, they've been through hell and back over the last 3 years. So for them, they basically have that attitude, we will deal with that once it gets to us. But there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of fear, because the funding that U.S. been sending there, I'm talking about humanitarian funding, I'm not talking about military aid, is basically a bread and butter. I'm talking about access to healthcare, access to education. Just so you understand, most of the schools now, if they do in-person learning kids, they build underground facilities. If you go to Kharkiv now, the entire school system is underground. They took the metro station there and they redid it as a school, classrooms. And a lot of these initiatives, like we spoke with you earlier, like a AppDIA that gives access to government, connects about 20 million Ukrainians to government services, that particular project has also been supported through US aid, through US initiatives, talking about healthcare, access to vaccines, access to medical treatment to internally displaced. So there's a lot of fear in the hearts and the lives of these families that lost everything. But we are hoping that where US aid will be pulled back, the private foundations and donors will step in to fill that gap, to help us get through this horrible time until some sort of peace treaty is there. And then hopefully Ukraine can sustain their own economy down the line.
We want to be clear here with everybody so you understand. We are not talking here in this conversation about military aid. We're talking about humanitarian aid. I think you need to be very clear about that as you listen and watch us, because you might be thinking, well, we've been shipping weapons. Well, no, this is not about weapons. This is about humanity. This is about people. And we want to talk more about that. We want to talk more about, as we come back into the second half, we're coming towards the end of the first half of the show here, we want to talk more about, are the Ukrainian people hopeful? Do they see peace on the horizon? What is their idea of what a peace treaty might look like, and how might that look? You've got your finger on the pulse of that entire world. We want to get into that in part 2 of the show. But before we do, I want to make sure that people know how they can reach out to you, Yuriy, to your organization, and find out more about you and how they can support?
Yeah, you can go to our website, hfu.org. It's Hope for Ukraine. hfu.org. You can find all information about what we do on the ground and how you can get involved if you would like to do so.
Okay, and you also have socials, right?
Yeah, we got our social Instagram, Hope for Ukraine, Facebook, Reds, Blue Sky, X. There's so many of them. So just at Hope for Ukraine, you can find us everywhere.
And we'll make sure that all those links are published in the show notes. So if you didn't hear them or you somehow missed it and you want to go support, just look into the show notes. You'll find it there. We're going to be back in part 2 of the show. We're going to talk again about the real hope for Ukraine. Is it there? Not just in how Yuriy and organizations like Yuriy's are supporting Ukraine, but within the people. What do they see as the possibility of peace? And what would that look like for them realistically as we move forward? So we're going to be back in just one click. So stay curious, my friends. Stay curious. Let's all hope for Ukraine.